come to the ninth section of this part of our study of the book of Exodus, the last chapters, and all of a sudden we get a whole big block of material all at once, chapters 35 through 40. If you had not looked ahead, it might surprise you the detail that you get now in this section. After a very short little bit of time about the Sabbath laws once again and the severity connected with disobedience of the Sabbath laws, we now get a whole recap of all of the building of all the different parts of the tabernacle. I must admit that as I read this through in Hebrew, it is always very difficult to get through even the first time, because all of the very technical terms don't make for very easy reading. But to have to face it all twice and have not only the description of it and then the building of it come after that gives me pause. And yet there are those who would see that because of the very great detail to which all of this is put and described, would remind everyone once again of the kind of detail in terms of daily living that one would have as well. Not that God has life in a box, not that everything has to be perfection and there can be no variation, but that there is a kind of a sequence. God calls us to do something, and then we do it. And here, on a very simple level, there were things that the people were called to do, and they did them. So we have, first of all, the preparation, and then the construction of all the different parts, and then building it and putting it up for the first time. You might have noticed that we have not covered a whole lot of time in all of this material. The time that Moses is up on Mount Sinai, there are two sections of 40 days. Of course, it was the beginning of the third month after they had left when they would have gotten to Mount Sinai, and then they prepare for God to speak to them. About 3 months of time is covered with Moses being up on the mountain, and so that already takes you into about the end of the fifth month. And so then in about 7 months it takes them to construct all of this according to the way that it's put together here. And the beginning of the second year, in other words, just a year after they had come out of Egypt, they now have a kind of a movable mountain. And that's really what the tabernacle is. It's more than that tent of meeting that Moses would go to where God would speak to him. The blessings now of manna and of the spiritual manna, the instruction from God, are now put together in a covenant box. God says, yes, I will go with you. This is not anymore the honeymoon phase. There has already been unfaithfulness that very early time within this marriage or covenant relationship. And yet God says, I'll travel along. I'll be your God. We haven't gotten to the point yet where they send out the spies, and when the spies come back with good news about the land, but say that there are such gigantic people there that they are afraid to go up. We'll find that the next section of material, the entire book of Leviticus, covers all sorts of instruction about offerings in the first 7 chapters for sin and then for peace or celebration offerings. Then chapters on the ordination of Aaron and his sons and the sin of the older 2 sons, which causes their death. And then a variety of different laws on various purity issues. Chapter 16 of Leviticus will be a section about the Day of Atonement, Yom Kippur. 17 to 26 is a rather extended section about the laws that are to guide many of the daily events of the people. And then chapter 27 of Leviticus is about certain vows that the people make. The beginning of Numbers is, of course, a numbering of all the people as they are leaving Mount Sinai. And then it goes on with, from about chapter 10 on, with a description of the sending out of the spies, the murmuring of the people as they complain about Moses' wife, as Aaron and Miriam do. They complain about the leadership of Moses and Aaron. They complain about the leadership of the tribe of Levi. They complain about lack of bread, complain about lack of water, complain about lack of meat, some things that we have seen them complain about already here. And so but by the time of chapter 21 of Numbers, they have now been consigned to live out in the wilderness. But the time from about Exodus 20 all the way through Numbers 10 covers just a little bit over this year. The rest of the book of Numbers then tells us about the events as they come around east from the Dead Sea and are going to go into the country of Israel from just north of the Dead Sea at Jericho, and certain victories that they win. And then the entire book of Deuteronomy is a speech of Moses that in many ways covers not much more than a day in the presence of all the people before Moses dies and they are ready to pass over. So it's not as if all of this material is equal chunks of Bible for equal numbers of years. Uh, the book of Exodus in all the way actually from Exodus 3, with Moses being 80 years old at Mount Sinai until they come back to Mount Sinai and leave it once again, is probably not more than maybe 3 years or something like that. There's about a year with the plagues, and then about a year as they are there, and then the time that they are leaving in the beginning of the third year. So we have a lot of the constitution of the people all pulled together in the books of Moses. Specifically at this point, we are told that the people brought so much that finally Moses had to say, okay, enough already. That kind of problem doesn't seem to be true in the Christian church today. It's always that we need more. And wouldn't it be amazing if we said to the people, we have enough, God has given us everything we need, and you've been so gracious and moved to give that we have all that we need. Here, with the giving of all the things for that one particular structure, Moses was able to say that there is enough. But notice that they gave because God stirred the heart, and God made the spirit willing. All giving is really something that results from what God, first of all, stimulates the people to do. And that comes from God describing what he would do, and the people freely able to respond to what he has done. So there is going to be a relationship whereas we get stirred to give, it is going to be in part because of hearing the good news, hearing the promise of God, hearing what he says he will do. And thus those who are not willing to give haven't really heard the good news, haven't been reminded of it. No one gives because someone is supposed to. The giving is all in response to God, who first gives to us. And thus the good news is always the motivating factor, and those whom we would pray would grow in giving and celebrating really need to hear not just the news about what people need or what God needs, but what God has given. We get the long extended section then here about the building of everything with Bezalel and Oholiav listed first of all, and how they get all of the different equipment. Their hearts are also stirred as they are providing for everything to be constructed, and other people who are stirred up come and help them with the process. And they build the tabernacle, and they build the ark, they build the table where the showbread, the manna is going to be placed. They build the lampstand where the eternal lamps, the lamps that are always burning, are going to be. The altar of incense that's going to be in front of the Holy of Holies. Of course, they have built the ark so that that can be put in the Holy of Holies itself with the cherubim on the top. They make the oil up for it. The altar of burnt offering for out in the court area, and the court itself is built. All the materials for that are brought, and of course all the curtains and hooks and pins and basins and bases and all of that are all done as well. Then the vestments, all of the sacred vestments that the high priest and his family will wear, are completed. And then a very nice kind of little comment toward the end of it. It says, after everything was all done, then Moses blessed the people. He recognized that God had moved them to give, and he blessed them and thanked them in essence for what they had done for this building project. And then chapter 40, we have the erection. All of the stuff had been built and constructed, and now they put it all together. You'll notice along the way that there are some places where it says that there were hooks, and that then there was a pole that was run through, like on the altar of incense and the Ark of the Covenant. Those would be carried by people who would not directly touch the sacred ware. It would have taken time for this all to be packed up. I can remember when we took our older two kids out on a trip to the west, and we had a pop-up camper, and just putting that up and down was enough effort that it took some time every single day. And no matter how many people you have involved here, it is not as if the people were each day moving 2 miles or 3 miles with their flocks and then plopping down, and then they would have to reconstruct the tabernacle and then take it all down the next day. We would get the idea much more that in stages, as they were pasturing their animals, that from time to time that would be erected or taken down. You've got the cloud of pillar of cloud by day and the pillar of fire by night. It says when it is first set up that the presence of God was so strong there Moses couldn't even go in, almost like he'd be bounced back as he is trying to go in. That God really wanted the people to know that he was with them. And when that cloud would rise up, then they would know that they were to move on. The tabernacle is a very interesting arrangement. It says even in the wilderness there was a place of safety, a place in the center, a place where the people were not to come. They were not to leave the camp, and they were not to go into the holy place or the Holy of Holies except by the invitation of God to Aaron and his family. But God did say, I'll go in your midst. I will be with you. This theme that we have all the way from the time of Abraham, as God said, I will bring you to a land, I will watch over your family, and someday I will give you possession of this land and take it away from those who live wickedly here. We're on that track now as the people are on their way to go up toward that land. It could have happened very soon. This generation is going to die out before it takes place. The next generation will go in, and they, like the other one, and like every successive generation to follow, will trip and fall, will act as if it's their own, and will finally need, though they don't recognize it at the time, they will need to have one who will change their heart inside and make them to be people who can come into God's presence, who can come into that presence of God without any curtains in the way, without the glory of God blasting them back, but with the glory of God drawing them closer to himself. That's what we all await, the time when we who are drawn into the presence of our Lord in holy baptism will be able to come into God's presence directly. And with that we can celebrate with the people who at one time were able to come close to God in worship, and know that at the place where we worship as well, that God is there, he dwells among us, he blesses us, and he promises that his word never returns void, but always accomplishes what he would have it do. He calls us to celebrate and use the gifts that he gives. May God continue to bless all of us as we study and grow together. Thank you very much once again for your faithfulness also to study the book of Exodus.